Hello and welcome to the Happy Musicians Podcast, where it's not about getting the gig, it's about enjoying it. My name is Tanner Gus, and I'm so grateful to have you with me today for a fantastic episode. Very excited about it. But before I get into it, I want to thank all you happy musicians out there supporting and promoting the show. Everyone sharing posts on social media, buying apparel and practice fuel mugs and positivity posters online, and especially those of you who leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Not only is it the most effective way to help me fight the algorithm and promote this show, I also comb through each one with an eager intensity like a Joni Mitchell record, and I read one each week on the podcast, like this one from Spoolie G. It says, Tan the podcast, man. This podcast is so important, it puts countless everyday musician struggles in perspective and provides actionable advice and deep insight into how to be a happy musician, which is really just a better, more concise version of the About page on the website, so I might have to steal it. Thanks again, Spoolie G. Now, on to today's episode, which features Kris Johnson. Kris is a wonderful musician and friend of the show. He was on the panel discussion I recently led at Gen X. He's a trumpet player, educator, arranger, composer, and just all-around, incredible artist. This podcast came at a bit of a difficult time for us. The day before we got together, our friend Courtney Isaiah Smith passed away from COVID complications. And it is just this one hurts, honestly, and I don't have the words to capture how special of a person and musician Courtney was. So I'd rather just point you to episode 23 and 24 of this show, where I had Courtney on and he expresses in his own beautiful way how he just wanted to make the world a better place. So in our conversation, Kris and I talk a bit about Courtney and about the loss of so many torchbearers right now. And then we also talk about education, how to make the education system healthier and happier and more aligned with the opportunities that technology in the 21st century give to us. We talk a lot about mentorship and about how if you're looking for a mentor, educator, and musical guide in the same person, you might be asking for too much. Kris has a ton of fantastic musical offerings available on the web, but I picked this one to feature because it has Courtney on keys. So Courtney, we love you, we miss you. This one goes out to you. And without further ado, everyone, please help me welcome Kris Johnson. Kris Johnson, welcome to the Happy Musicians Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel welcomed.
I'm glad, and I wish it was under a bit better circumstances. We were just talking before this, but Courtney Isaiah Smith, who's a friend of the podcast and was on here, passed away really suddenly from COVID complications, and that was yesterday, so this is just a lot for all of us to handle. And I don't know, man, this is rough for a lot of reasons. Courtney was just so special, and I didn't even get to know him super well, but every interaction I had with him was impactful. And maybe I'm just curious what your relationship was like with him.
Courtney was oddly terrific. Just a music nerd through and through. Just like the nerdiest, sweetest, and I say that with the most love possible. Because I'm definitely a nerd, but he out-nerded me when it came to music. It was quite beautiful. Wonderful human being, man. It sounds so cliche. There's just so many cliche things that go through my head. He was a really sweet person, but he really was, man. And very, very laser focused on his craft.
Yeah.
Courtney was always dealing with something musically. He was always delivering. He was always talking about a record. If he wasn't talking about Star Trek or something, always talking about a record or a movie. He was a fanatic of everything that he did. He did it at such a high level, and his understanding and his delivery was just really, really quite incredible. And I just remember he would always just surprise the crap out of me, whenever we would play live. like to the point where it would be like overwhelming the amount of like reharms he could do. But then too, just these like really sensitive moments we'd have too, where we would just line up and be on the same page because he listened,
Yeah.
and would just take these like solos that would make you not want to play the rest of the night. Like, I'm going to play the melody and I'm going to go sit down. Courtney, you got it. Just, just dynamic. And he will be greatly missed. This is a rough one, I'm not going to lie. But I think, considering the nature of this, what we're dealing with, I think this is all about living in our truth and being honest. So I don't really feel, I don't feel compelled to fake this or step away from this in any way. But yeah, it's a really tough one. I'll miss him a lot. Beautiful musician, beautiful human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, honestly, and I don't mean to take away from anyone else's experience with COVID, and like everyone's been impacted by it, and it sucks. We've all lost people, but I don't know if everyone realizes like how fragile like the lineage of Black American music is, and how huge of a hole losing someone like Courtney leaves. And there have been so many examples since the pandemic started of elders and practitioners of this music who were torchbearers who needed so much more time to pass that torch along,
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if, and I that kind of feeds into just mentorship, which is something I know you're big on and something I'm hoping to unpack today. But life's a marathon, total cliche. There will probably be a lot of cliches today.
That's okay.
But it takes so long to figure this stuff out, and having people along with you to just help you through the journey is so important. I think musicians tend to learn better than most that to really understand something takes a really long time. And so I'm curious now, having been mentored by people growing up and now at an age where you're in education positions and starting to mentor more people, what does that role mean to you? And what does it mean for like the community?
Yeah, I mean, I've always saw the importance of it. I mean, I began mentoring probably, before I should have been mentoring, but I began mentoring like I was still in high school. I was teaching private lessons. I was drum major at my high school. I was in leadership positions. It became apparent to me like pretty immediately when I looked at like the effect that my high school band director, Damian Crutcher, had on me, the leadership that was around me, the older students, the different, musicians in the community. I saw directly how transformative those experiences were of just being in close proximity to people who like cared about you and who would invest time in you, who would be tough on you, who would kind of, show you the things that they were passionate about. And honestly, I didn't really have a outlet for that or a place for that. I hadn't really experienced that until I got to high school. And I started seeing that in the musical community. And it was just like, it really spoke to me in a way where I immediately started to want to give back. I was like, okay, this is so essential. I want every musician I meet, I want them to have this experience. I want them to walk away feeling like more confident in themselves, feeling better about who they are, feeling like I'm a resource, And even if it was like, okay, cool, I know 5 more things than you. Like, here are those 5 things. Let's go. And so, for me, I think it can really start at any age. I just kind of just had that hyper focus, from a very young age and I also found, and I think this is really important, is that, yes, there's a major benefit to like, seeing a young student and helping them. But I definitely learned along the way that there's a portion of it too there's a portion that's selfless and helping somebody, but there's a portion of it too that's very self-serving, and I think in a very beautiful way. Every time that I have a conversation with a young musician, or a young person in general, or any aspiring artist, and I'm able to share any level of knowledge, I feel better. I gain more clarity. I remind myself of lessons that I've learned. I pay some sort of respect to Marcus Belgrave or to any of my mentors that, you know, that I grew up around hearing, and I'm able to carry that legacy forward. And that's something that is just incredibly meaningful to me.
Hmm.
So it's not just like, oh, okay, let me just, be a martyr and just, or just be, self-sacrificing and just share this knowledge. Man, no, it's like, it's really a privilege. I really view it that way.
Yeah.
So, and I feel like that was the experience that I had. That's the experience that I had, with my mentors as well. It's a privilege to to be able to not only perform this music, not only to like add to it, but also to be able to help the next generation of people that want to participate in it. And right now, specifically the types of things that we talk about, being able to not only convey some of the messaging that I received, but also to be able to improve upon it, talk about things that were not talked about when I was younger, to be
Yeah.
able to talk about mental health, to be able to give students that safe space. That's just
Mhm.
something that I think is really sacred.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot to unpack there. I'm curious if you do you prescribe to the idea that like mentorship is kind of part of your role, like it's something that you owe to give back to the music now that you've received it.
Yes and no. I I can only speak for myself. I do not believe that everybody's meant to be a mentor.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not of the mindset of like that it's owed necessarily. I just believe in callings. And I feel like I have definitely been called to do a number of things, but I've definitely been called to be a mentor.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some people I know that don't have an inch of that in them. It's just not who they are. And that's okay. They can inspire and serve in other ways. And they
Yeah.
do inspire and serve in other ways. It doesn't have to be directly through mentorship.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a cool distinction to make because even someone who is a effective educator is not necessarily an effective mentor or should be in both roles. Do you think
Right.
they often come together, but do you view a distinction between the two when you're someone's like instructor?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it has to do with the person. Like, there are some people who are just naturally just kind of nurturing and mentor like. There are some people that are very just kind of like matter of fact, and you can get like facts from them, but they're not really going to give you a lot of life advice. Then there are some people that just don't do either. I
Mm-hmm.
know some great musicians who are just like, I don't teach.
Yeah.
And it's okay. There used to be like some judgment on that, but the
Mm.
reality is like, at least you know that about yourself. And then I do know some educators that like are not, you know, great practitioners of this music, but are fantastic educators, and they make such a huge impact, are so essential.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's ever black and white.
Mm-hmm.
It's very there's a lot of gray area in the
Yeah,
middle.
for sure.
And there are some musicians who are just straight up musicians, not educators, not mentors, in that sense, that I learned so much from by just going to watch them live. Just being at their live show. I'm like, okay, you don't need to say anything. Just like you just did it. You
Just
just
keep
taught me
playing.
so much. Yeah, exactly. Like I'm good. I'm good.
Uh-huh.
So I think when we get into the realm of treating the leadership as this one size fits all, everybody has to be a mentor, everybody has to be an educator. If we start putting people in that box, it's the same box that we don't want to put our students into.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
Yeah,
not. It's not conducive to individuality.
definitely. And man, it's tough because especially like with how expensive a college degree is sometimes, like it's very easy and you should hold the faculty to really high standards, but sometimes the things that people get critical of are like that's not a fair thing to be asking of them. Like
Mm,
if you're upset that your private instructor at school isn't all three of those hats, a mentor, an educator, and a fantastic player and practitioner of it,
right.
like that's a lot to ask. And I don't know, how do you view like yourself being evaluated and judged by students in those settings?
I mean, to me, there's in the musical community, there's like one way of viewing it. But then when you are hired into any form of academic institution and you have a job to do, then you
Mm-hmm.
have a job description, you have a contract, there's a certain expectation that you're going to reach a certain standard of excellence. and be able to deliver to students. There's professional development that's available. There's opportunity to grow in those areas
Mm.
so you can serve your student body. So I think in a more formal setting, I believe, students do have the right to have a certain demand out of, the quality of education that they're receiving. I also believe that there should be an understanding that it's not one size fits all, but I believe that there's, you could take your greatest educator in an institution and you could take, your greatest player who like just doesn't have that in them. But like there should be an attempt to learn from each other. Someone who's a great educator, not like maybe the best performer, should be trying to figure out how to become a better performer so they can inspire their students more and provide a better educational experience. The person who's not the best educator can learn from those educators that are around them. So I think when you formalize the relationship, then that expectation is there, and it's really important to take that on. Now again, that doesn't mean they need to become like the award-winning educator, but they can definitely make sure they can do enough to serve their students who are paying tuition or are paying for their service.
That's cool. I like that. And now I'm thinking like I feel like the faculty evaluations, I guess I haven't read them, but I've written them and kind of seen it from my point of view. Seems like it's like, what are your students' grades are, like how, like, sometimes it's like, were you nice to them? Like these very hard to judge things, but it would be cool if it was like, are you growing as a musician and an educator yourself? Like that's the evaluation is, are you getting better at this, not are you hitting the marks that are standardized, because students go through that and now like teachers are being put through that too. But that would be really cool to do it that way, to just like set a standard of growth in your faculty no matter what level they're at.
Yeah, I think the thing that's important to keep in mind is to treat an institution exactly like as what it is. It's not a replacement for the culture that we receive in the community. It is a form of community, but it is not the community. It is a, it's a formal relationship where you're looking to receive a credential by the time that you leave there. You do have a formal classes that are set up with tangible goals, and there's a benefit to the educational institution in the way that it's set up, but there's a benefit to the informal relationships that you develop outside of universities and institutions as well. So I think that it becomes difficult to want everything to be perfect and fair, or for everything to be, to reflect the community inside the institution, when the institution is going to have certain limitations. The community is going to have certain limitations. Ideally, if you find a really great school and you find a really great community to learn from, then you're getting, both sides of everything.
Okay.
It's hard. I just feel like it's kind of like, if you take like, like a pack of lions and put them in a zoo exhibit and then wonder why the lions don't act very lion-like. It's just like, it's not the natural habitat for that. Now, maybe if they were like, we're talking about like an animal that's injured and they need some sort of like special surgery so they can survive in the wild, and for a limited time they're nursed back to health with that injury, and then they're put out back into the wild to like, okay, that's different. But if you actually expect like this wild animal to behave normally and to develop normally outside of a context in which they actually have to develop like that, well, that's just not necessarily practical. So think of it like this. Think of college as being this time where you are held and coddled and given a certain amount of information and mentored and all these things. But ultimately, there's still so much that you're going to have to learn when you go out into the real world. There was a drum professor named Randy Gillespie, just fantastic drummer, beautiful human being, beautiful mentor, just so wise, who taught at Michigan State while I was there. He's still teaching there now, just a wonderful musician. But he used to always tell us, right? And he would tell his story so slow. I learned so much about him because he would take his time with his pacing. He used to always say, all right, now, how much time does a doctor spend going to school? Like, well, they have their undergraduate studies, right? Okay, yeah. So they do that for 4 years. And they go to med school. And they're there for, I don't know, I'm going to make up the amount of years. Let's say another like 6 years. It's probably longer. Who knows? Whatever. They do that. He's like, well, what do they do? They finish with their medical degree. And then what do they go into? They go into their practice. And that used to just hit me, man. Like, He's like, you're in school, you're getting this degree, you're doing all this advanced study, but what are you going to do when you get done? You're going to keep practicing. It's not like, oh, okay, now I'm a doctor and I'm perfect. No, they call it their practice. It's what they're constantly doing. And so to me, it's like, okay, we're doing all this prep work only to then send it out into the real world, send it out and do some field training. You know, you learn so much more in the real world, but the preparation, hopefully, that you have from the university will help, you know, make you better equipped to do that.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
not a replacement. Never
Not a replacement. Yeah. And like, do you think there are is that the education system could be adapted to better reflect what the community experiences? Or do you think that trying to turn the academic setting into that setting would take away from the strengths of what the academic setting does, which is like give you these tools as hopefully efficiently as possible?
I think that there could be more conversations happening between the academic institutions and the actual communities that they're trying to serve. I think there could be a bit more preparation from a standpoint of we're preparing you for this community, whereas oftentimes it's like, you know, the academic institution is like the big house on top of the hill that's looking down on everybody else. And this becomes a big issue when ideals and traditions and practices change, or the ideals and practices of the real world or of the community aren't reflected in the teaching of the college. If they work together in tandem, and I've seen it work, you know, I've seen programs work where it's like, you know, they're very much intertwined, then it serves the students better. You know, to me, like I would tell students like, yeah, there's a certain amount that you're going to learn here, but you also need to like, I used to tell students all the time, like that apartment that you have that you're paying $1,200 a month for, what would happen if you just decided while I'm in college, I'm going to live in a cheaper apartment that's like $600 a month, get a couple of roommates, use that other $600 a month and travel 1 weekend out of the month, go to LA, go to New York, go to Nashville, visit some clubs, go to some studios, go to some jam sessions, go see some concerts, go see like some high-end concerts, go see people do this in context, because you can't learn everything just sitting in Columbus, Ohio, where I taught at one time, or sitting at, you know, University of Utah in Salt Lake City. There's only a certain amount that you can see. But the reality is, like, there's no waiting. It's not like, oh, I have to sit here and once I get this degree, I'll be worthy to go check. No, go check the music out. There's no reason you can't do both at the same time. And so I think if universities recognized that more across the board, then, you know, there might be some more success. But the hard part is it's also extremely siloed because there's such different opinions about even what music is, about what jazz is, about what's important, what's not important. And it's okay to be specific, but it's like it's super, super divided. So I want to say it's like a little bit idealistic to believe that it can exist differently. But, you know, there are programs that are doing it. So I say just, you know, try to find the program that has the best balance. And then also understand that, you know, if you're inside of a program that has one very, very specific, like almost dogmatic view, you learn that really, really well. There's a lot you could benefit from that. You can always go on and spend the rest of your educational, you know, like the rest of your professional career educating yourself in other ways. But at least you can say, I know how to do this one, like school of thought. I know this really well.
Yeah. And I also think that as like specifically high school educators should really encourage students to do a ton of research, and that these universities should be really upfront about what they offer, because I don't think there's anything wrong with, as you said, doing one thing really well. Like, we're going to help you, like you're going to be a monster straight ahead player, but that's what our focus is. And if the school is upfront about that, and you know that going in, and then you're just complaining that you aren't learning how to play modern, like contemporary improvised music, that's kind of unfair, because the school was pretty honest. In an ideal situation, you know, that like, this is what we do, and this is the experience that you're going to get. I think that and it's tough though, because high schoolers, like, you don't exactly know what you want yet, but I can't say enough about researching what your experience is going to be like when you go to the university.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm still curious, like, when you say a disconnect between what the community is looking for and what the university offers. Can you give an example of like what a disconnect there might look like?
Yeah. And I'll make the disclaimer that, you know, I don't have the solution. And I want to make that clear because I think sometimes these conversations can sound like, you know, it's university bashing or that it's like I'm not anti-university in any way. I mean, I've taught at several universities. I have 2 degrees in jazz that have taken me very, very far. I encourage students, go to school, get a degree, empower yourself. So it's more so kind of like I talk about this stuff just to make sure students know, like, don't expect one place to give you everything you need. It's totally okay to like go to Trader Joe's and go to Kroger to get the groceries that you need in a day. Like it's, if, you know, like it's really fine. Go to Whole Foods too for that one specialty item, you know, if you have the money for it. Like it's totally fine. But I think if we get into this dogmatic mindset on either side, and there's an anti-school dogmatic mindset as well, that it's like, no, I don't subscribe to that. Like do what works for you and what propels you forward. The disconnect I mean is like, you know, I'll use myself as an example. I graduated from Michigan State. We had a phenomenal program, some really great professors. I learned so much. I had a ton of things, but like the style of music that I knew really well is like, I know how to play some bebop heads. I played a lot of Duke Ellington and Thad Jones music and big band. That was my experience. And it was like killing. We had a lot of great musicians. The thing that I struggled with when I got out that I wish I had known more about in college, and maybe it wasn't the appropriate time to learn it, I wish I had known more about like what it was like to play in a studio. I wish I knew more about what it was like to work with contracts, the importance of having a website, the importance of developing social media. But that's not even fair because social media was literally created while I was in college. So like, you know, so like but there's a lot of like business type things, different styles of music, realizing that I'm not going to be able to just like, I really love the music of Miles Davis and that's all I want to play. But you know, if I want to make ends meet, there's a lot of different types of things I have to do. So I just think that there's a certain amount of like diversity and what's the word that I'm looking for? Is my brain working today? You have to be like somewhat like, I think, flexible in your musical career in order to survive, you know? There's a word I'm looking for. I can't find it right now. It's not even a complicated word, but I think it's just really essential that you have a varied musical experience. And the thing is, and here's the thing I want to get at. Do I expect for there to be like one business of music class that taught me everything I needed to know? No. Would I expect there to be like a Studio 101, like this is everything you need to know course? No. But I think acknowledging it, having a short seminar, having a master class, having more experiences tailored towards that, having conversations about it, encouraging students. Because the thing is, there's like plenty of stuff that I don't do that I can encourage a student to go do. Like, hey, I think this is really important. I'm not the expert on this, but you should spend more time in a studio. So find a local studio and just ask if you can like intern there for a summer. Do, you know, have these different experiences. I think more facilitation of things that students could do that would be extracurricular would help, you know, help everybody a lot. So those are the types of things. Again,
that's super cool.
It's not always about changing the curriculum at the university as much as it is like be aware of the resources, point the students in those directions. And, you know, I believe those things are happening now. I mean, a lot more of the students that I know that are coming out of Michigan State are having more diverse experiences and doing more things. So these programs also have to grow. And let's not forget that specifically when we're talking about, you know, jazz programs at the university level are fairly new.
Yeah, for sure.
You really think about like comparatively, like it's fairly new. I used to hear stories
stuff out.
Yeah, I used to hear stories about there was a trumpet player from Detroit, older gentleman who, you know, was just like a fan of music, used to come to a lot of concerts, but he used to play trumpet, and he would tell me stories about how he wasn't a music major, but he wanted to play jazz. They couldn't call it jazz at Michigan State. He went to Michigan State. They couldn't call it jazz because jazz was not allowed to be played on campus at all. And this was like, I don't know, from what I'm gathering, this was like in the 70s. So you couldn't play jazz at all, right? And the pep band would have to rehearse in the student union. they weren't allowed to play that style of music in the School of Music at all. And if a music major got caught playing jazz or practicing jazz in the School of Music, they would be kicked out of the program. So it just shows you like how far we've come in like a short amount of time. So I think there's also a certain amount of patience, both from the student perspective, the community's perspective, the university perspective, of just kind of learning of like what's most effective for these students to, to learn and gain from.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's awesome. I really like that you're kind of approaching it from a mindset of like, know what you're good at and do that thing from like the university, but also I like that if it's like, okay, we don't offer that thing, we could try to create that course, or there's a studio in town that we could send the interested students to go work at, at like, right. What's the term? Now I'm losing words too.
That's okay.
Yeah, passing around the resources like that is cool. And I also think like there's a vested interest in the universities if they want to compete in the internet age to offer really diverse curriculum. And I think schools are learning that and figuring it out. But also, I think that students need to give themselves more credit and agency. And if you're in a program and you're actively thinking, I'm not learning about business, and then you don't like Google music business and buy some books and do it yourself, and you're 3 years later getting burned on a contract and you're like, well, I didn't learn it in school. I think that's also unfair because
incredibly,
the resources are available to you if you want to get them. So if you realize you aren't getting those, you can encourage the school to offer them. But if they don't let that be an excuse to not get the information.
Absolutely. At this point, like there's, again, something else. I want to say like either YouTube was invented or became popular while I was in college too. So it's like a whole other thing. All of a sudden, there's just all these other resources that are available and people start developing more content. But the idea of that, so I think it's really hard because like the way in which technology has changed the world, it's changed so dramatically. And the amount of red tape that institutions have to go through just to get like a new curriculum approved or to be able to do things in different ways, it takes a lot of time. There's like a very old way of doing things. But that doesn't apply to the students. Like I would pull up, I'm sure I'd pull up YouTube at least once every lesson that I've ever taught, or Spotify or something, or some form of every single lesson of, hey, did you know about this? Okay, go check this out. But for me, it's like, oh man, you ever hear this record of Clifford Brown with Strings? No. Unless they had a copy of it like in their office. Okay, go check that out. End of conversation. And then I'd have to like go to the store and hope they had the CD or order the CD. I couldn't even like go on Amazon and just order the CD. No, it was like go to the physical store, have them order it for you. I know I'm old. But funny part is I'm not that old, right? I'm gonna be 38 this year.
Yeah,
and I'm talking about like
crazy.
In my time. I remember when Napster like started the MP3 craze and it was illegal. We used to download. Man, I used to have like I had like a jazz A through D, E through E through I CD collection where I would just download as many songs as possible and throw them on these CDs and then delete them from my hard drive so I'd have more room on my hard drive and just listen. Half the time I didn't even know who I was listening to, and there was no Shazam. There was no. These resources are abundant. So my thing is, if I'm talking to, when I was in the Basie band, if I'm being mentored by one of the musicians in the Basie band and I'm talking to them about their experiences, I'm not going to suddenly be like, well, I really need you to learn how to like, teach me this in a technology, like in a way that work pairs together with technology. It's like, no. Do what you do. I'm going to learn everything I can from you. And then I'm going to have the autonomy to go out and take care of that other part myself. So I'm totally with you. It's not a one-stop shop. That's not really how the world works anymore.
And the good news is it's so easy to go to multiple stops now.
It's like, it's so easy that I think it's difficult for students. I will say, I feel like I'm in a really sweet spot. All the old man stories that I told you before of, oh, back in my day, this didn't exist. The thing is, there's a benefit to that. Because I have to say, like, appreciation level, like, I love my studio and the ease and the convenience of it so much because I remember when it wasn't that easy to get access to music. I remember ordering VHS tapes from some random company online and sending them a money order in an envelope to try to get a VHS tape of like Weather Report Live. Like scouring the internet to find out who had it and ordering a tape and then hoping that they send it to you, that it's not like a scam. Now it's just like youtube.com weather report and you can watch all the, so like to me, it directly impacts me how easy it is to access this. I feel like for some people of younger generation, I would imagine that there's so much available that nothing is like valuable or sacred. Dave Chappelle had a great skit where he was talking about that. He's like, I believe it was something we were talking about, like we used to just not know things. You know, there was a time where like you didn't know something, and now we just like we always open up our phone and look something up. He's like, it's just like, I don't know, what's the name of that thing? I have no idea. And then just go on with your day. There's so much information. I think it's overwhelming for some people. Whereas if you understand the convenience of it, you're like, great, I'm gonna take advantage of all this.
Yeah, especially like right now, some of the biggest stars and like most crafted musicians are offering free lessons, not free lessons, they're offering virtual lessons. Yeah. Like you don't, and I don't think that's going away now that people have figured out how to do it. These remote virtual lessons, like that's going to stick around. And if you're like, well, I am nervous to go to school, I want to go to school out of state because I don't have master practitioners in my state, but you're going to get $80,000 of debt if you go out of state. You could go in state and take virtual lessons from like 3 different incredible musicians, you know, on a monthly basis and like supplement it that way. I definitely think there are different models of education that could be implemented rather than just like, this is where I go to school and whatever they teach me is what I know.
And the thing is, it's never going to go back to like what it was. It's never going to go backwards. I agree. This is here to stay. The world has changed forever, you know? And personally, I love the amount of access that I have of having a platform where I can say, like, honestly, that's how Office Hours started. My platform started because there were so many lessons that I would teach to my students and I would teach them over and over again. And it's like a bunch of Krisisms that I'm just like, this is a really particular way in which I teach this. And I've taught this lesson a million times. It's like, okay, wait, if I learned how to like edit a video together of me saying this, I could say this one time and then like a student anywhere could do it. They could show up to the lesson. Okay, I already watched your lesson on, you know, tritone substitutions. Now we do a follow-up and get more in depth rather than like me spending an hour. Like I used to like sometimes be back to back. I just taught the same lesson to Gus, and then I teach the same lesson to Evan. I teach the same, you know, it's just like, okay, wait, or I could provide this resource and they could be that much further ahead. And then I could be happier as an educator too.
And that's cool because
spending my time, you know?
Yeah, it's not, yours is like a website that you can sign up for, but you can also just offer it to your students at the school you're teaching, and then they're better prepared so that you can get into more advanced material. That's really cool.
Absolutely. You know, or even in the lesson, I know I explained it like perfectly. Like I'm so happy with it. I'm like, hey, let's just take 5 minutes, watch this video.
Oh, I like that.
Stumble over myself for an hour.
That's cool. I've never heard of an educator like using their pre-recorded material in that way, and I am very excited to hear that. I think that's really cool.
Oh man, it's to me, it respects the student's time a bit more too, and I think it's really like the way of the future. Because the thing is, like, it's not exciting to hear me just like regurgitate rudimentary things. Now, it may be helpful, but if I can do that in the most streamlined way possible, and I'm talking about if I put in the effort to give you, here is a written worksheet that you can work through. I'm going to play it for you. You're going to see it light up on the screen, and I'm going to talk to you about it all at the same time.
Yeah.
Then at some level, the student's like, I have been spoken to, and they've all been spoken to in the same way. So then from that point, I mean, there was a time where I was touring a lot, and I had to, take a lot of tours. I'm trying to get tenure, and I'm also, of course, trying to survive and be a working musician and be a college professor and all this.
And you got a family.
It's insane. My life was crazy. Right? I'm so happy to be home right now, but my life was absolutely insane. But I reached the point where my classes where I'm like, okay, wait a minute. You guys can still meet. The graduate assistant will play the lesson, and then you guys just dissect what's going on from there and then hit me up with follow-up questions. And for a period of time, obviously I'm not going to spend the whole semester like that. There's a benefit in that because it's like, hey, I'm going to drop the mic on you. Here's the information. You go figure that out. And honestly, that's what a lot of my interactions were like with different mentors that I had growing up in Detroit. A lot of them, I never had a formal trumpet lesson with Marcus Belgrave. As much as I talk about him, as much as his legacy is super, super important to the entire Detroit community, to the world, to me specifically, I never had a formal trumpet lesson with him. I played under him in ensembles. I went to a lot of his gigs. I had conversations with him, and I learned so much because he would drop the mic on me. He would just, all of a sudden, he would just be like, oh man, you got to do this, and you got to learn about the things, blah, blah. And then he would walk away, and I'm like, okay, I had to go figure out what he was talking about. But then the next time I came back to him, I knew that more thoroughly. But honestly, sometimes with some of, you learn week to week with the student. Sometimes they come back the next week and it drives me insane. And it's just, it's where they are. But they would come back and it's like, hey, did you practice what I showed you last week? Oh no, I ran out of time. And I'm like, man, so you spend an hour with me every single week and I'm giving it to you in this organized, presented way. I used to get 5 minutes with some of the musicians I looked up to, and I'd spend a month practicing it and then bring it back to them and know it like 3 times as well as what they expected. So there's something to be said about the level of access that young musicians have, and I think there's a culture that has to be built up around respecting the time of the musicians. I think sometimes students can get a bit too comfortable with musicians who are like really, really high level musicians, and just being comfortable wasting their time. The musicians that I look up to, honestly, my students, my peers, and musicians that I look up to, I would never waste anybody's time. There's never a time where I'm going to position myself where I'm not going to do what I say that I'm going to do, or that I'm going to waste anybody's time. I don't care where you are on the totem pole. That's just not the way we operate,
I like it. I think I really like all these ideas for kind of reframing what school looks like, more on a mental health side of what the experience is like, either for you in school or what you saw your students going through. What are practices that programs can implement to like foster healthier environments, and I guess kind of just put their why can't I think of what to say? A lot of times people talk about like we advocate for mental health, but it's like, well, what do you do? Like, what do you actually do to make that happen?
Right. I think that there's a tendency to teach these extremes of you should be practicing 8 hours a day. And I think sometimes stuff like that is dropped. You shouldn't be doing anything. You shouldn't have a social life. You should just be listening to music all day, or you should only be hanging out with musicians, or you need to be at this jam session every single week. I think there are things that are said with really, really, really solid intentions that an educator might really, truly believe would be beneficial to that student, or maybe what they did or what they think is ideal, but they don't realize what that means for different type of learners. There are some students that would be like highly problematic for them to practice for that many hours a day, or they're going to feel the stress or the pressure or the guilt if they aren't at the point in life where they're ready to dedicate that many hours a day, or if they have a job they have to go to or a relationship that they're maintaining that adds so much value to the life, and then they're feeling guilty because they didn't show up to the weekly jam session. I think that there's a lot of transparency, honesty, and empathy that students and educators could practice. And if we could normalize that, that it's not cookie cutter, that we're not all the same, and that we should try to understand where each other are, I think it would go a really, really long way. So if a student comes to me and is like, yeah, I didn't have the time to practice this week, instead of immediately going into lecture mode of like, well, where are your priorities, and making that student feel like crap, because I think that's not going to help. Instead, I might talk to them and say, okay, talk to me. What's going on in your life right now? Now, I'm not playing therapist. It's not my job to be the therapist, but it is to identify, why aren't you practicing? let's look at some areas in your life or some times in your life where you might not be spending your time as wisely, and maybe you could make more time for practice. Okay, how many hours are you putting in right now? Instead of prescribing 8 hours, that seems to be like the standard one, 8 hours a day of practicing. Cool. Let's get you to the point where you're practicing for an hour consistently a day as a college student. And then we're going to make a goal by next month. You're going to bring that up to an hour and a half. Meeting the student where they are and setting practical expectations for them goes a really long way. And then listening to them. And if what they're saying is beyond the scope of what you're comfortable dealing with, then you should have the number for the helpline or the counseling center, or know some resources or even some books or some podcasts that the students can go to as a resource to help them deal with this. But I think just recognizing it, because I think, for some people, it's just they don't believe in mental health, or maybe they're jaded because they weren't taught to seek out mental health, and there's a stigma around it. But it's 2021. We got to get past that. The reality is people struggle and they need help. And if you're not equipped to help them, then you can point them in the direction of the right resources. Yeah. So, I mean, but to me, a lot of that just comes down to, like, I don't know, have some empathy and be a good person. But maybe for some people, it's just not that simple because they weren't raised that way, or they don't think that way. Mm-hmm. But if you really look at the student as being a person who has a life and has these experiences and has struggles, what can you do to lift them up, to point them in the right direction towards success, instead of just guilting them? Yeah. Guilting them into practicing is never going to work.
And I think a huge part of that puzzle of fostering that mentality would be for the educators to set the example, to put themselves out there as, we are people with struggles and experiences and shortcomings, and not be afraid to talk about them and normalize it through example. Like,
yes.
Yeah, that would be like, if every professor that I had was open about talking about their struggles like you've been on here, I don't see how that couldn't shatter this image of, like, you have to be hyper invested and all in on this music with no doubts, and it's a weakness to be afraid or stressed about it. Well, that would be huge.
And I think the reality is that people are either going to give the advice that they received, which is sometimes toxic, the advice they wish they had received, which is oftentimes toxic, or they're too afraid to admit how much they're relating to what the student is saying. And so they project by basically telling the student to man up, and in the process, they're really telling themselves to man up, which is toxic. Or in some cases, they just can't relate because they didn't have that struggle, and because that struggle doesn't apply to them, then it must not really exist, which is toxic. And I don't think it's really, like, often I doubt that 99% of the time that it's intentional. But I think people just have to do research and just understand, like, mental health is a real thing, and developing empathy and learning how to relate to people and learning how to be a resource to your students is a real thing. And you cannot exist in this world as an educator and a mentor without accepting that, and also accepting people come from different backgrounds, different experiences, different capacities. Now, I want to be really clear that I don't believe in the opposite extreme. And I think the opposite extreme is, if you just show up, everything is fine. Don't do any work. It's okay. You just show up, and we're just going to give you just hugs and love, and you don't have to practice. I don't think that's not helpful either. I think that it is important to continue to set goals, continue to set standards, continue to lead by example. But I think you also have to be somewhat reasonable. But I think there's also a period of time where it's like, listen, I know that you're struggling. I'm going to point you in the direction of some resources. I'm going to give you some advice. But at the same time, in order to stay in this particular ensemble, this is the experience that everybody's going to have. Now, it's not about shaming them. It's, are you in a place right now where you feel like you can handle that, or to try to meet that goal? Because if you are, I can help you get there, and these resources can help you get there. If not, And this is the part that the system just unfortunately is not set up to do. It's okay if you need to go take some time to get ready to be able to handle this. And here are some things you can do. Now that's super not popular. A lot of people like will probably like, "Why? What are you saying?" But the reality is like, okay, maybe you just shouldn't be doing this right now.
Yeah.
Or maybe if you went and like spent a year and really worked on yourself and got some like deep therapy work and did some things, or even just practice some of the things you're really struggling with, like, man, you can't play above a G on top of the staff as a trumpet player, and you're really struggling and you're developing bad habits by trying to play lead trumpet in my ensemble. And the reality is you just shouldn't be trying to play notes that high, but there's a performance coming up. Because the performance company, you're trying to do that, you're actually going to hurt yourself in the long run. So instead, take a semester not playing in the jazz ensemble, just take lessons and your other classes and reset your embouchure and take the time that you need to take care of that. But it's like, I mean, I'm being real. That's just not going to happen. Like most programs aren't going to tell their scholarship student that, because it's not serving them. What would serve them is, no, I need you to play that high D right now. Oh man, the pressure's on. Okay, you got to get it together. You just got to practice. The thing is, there are some things that you can't push through. If you break your ankle, you can't just push through that. I love David Goggins, man. David Goggins is like phenomenal. But some of the stuff he's talking about, it's like, okay, dude, that works for him. And it's super inspiring that this like, no weakness. I was running a marathon on a broken ankle. That's good for you. But like, medically, that's just not like
that's a terrible idea.
That's a terrible idea. A terrible idea that worked perfectly for you.
Yeah.
I know that I'm a crazy person when it comes to like my work ethic, the amount of projects that I'm balancing, the amount of hours that I'm working. It's not for everybody. But again, how can my story inspire someone to find what does work for them? How can I inspire you to maybe get to that next level of productivity without it being like, you need to be like me? Nobody needs to be like me. That would be like super boring. I know me already. I already exist. We don't need another me.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So
I love it, man. I guess I just have one more question, really. I mean, and kind of just coming back to Courtney, the people that we've lost during COVID has kind of been the first time this has hit me. I felt like I was in a place where I was really connected with the community, and now there are just these holes that are left to be filled. And this isn't like a new experience for you per se. These are obviously like unique, beautiful individuals, but you've lost other friends that were big parts of the community and that have left big holes. Like, I don't know how to think about it. Like, do those need to be filled? Now, I'm not saying like step up to the plate, but how does the community heal from this kind of thing?
I'm not an expert on grief, and of course I've lost people, not nearly to the extent of others, more so than some other people. It's not about comparing experiences, but what I will say is, one, it's incredibly important to allow it to do like what it wants to do. If we try to suppress the tears, if we try to suppress the grief, that's where a lot of problems start. When you try to suppress a feeling from running its course and doing what it's supposed to do. It's important to grieve. It's important to feel what you're going to feel. In terms of moving beyond that, to me, it's like, we started off this conversation. We're like, oh man, I feel like that's so cliche. All right, this is going to sound really cliche. I want to stop that. I'm going to personally like make it an effort to stop that. I think what that is, honestly, I think that's a defense mechanism. As I'm thinking, I'm just talking about me. It's a defense mechanism of all of the jaded people that are like just so cynical about anything that just might be true. Like, who's to say it's cliche, or maybe it's just like true? But I will say something that I normally would have prompted, would have normally have said, this is going to sound so cliche. But here's the reality. Life is short. Life can feel long, but life oftentimes is short. And we do have to make the most of every single day. And I don't care what any cynical person might say, but the reality is, what I feel inspired to do is to think about my prolonged health. I feel inspired to think about the level of detail and study that this brilliant musician did, and how does that influence how much I'm studying, how many things am I checking out, how many things were on my bucket list as a musician that I want to do that I'm putting off. How many of those things can I do right now? How many of my like musical brothers and sisters can I make sure that I let them know how I feel about them as artists and as people, that I can tell them that I love them? Like, and not just in the like, make sure you tell your kid, like truly love on people and allow that to come out, and to not let yourself be jaded, to truly be like this bright light, to still be, almost like, I mean this with zero disrespect, I mean it as a very high compliment. Courtney was almost childlike in the way that he loved music. The expression that was on his face literally was like a kid in a candy store. He just looked so happy to just be there that moment playing, and to embrace that, to embrace this level of it. This is it, we're having fun of the highest level. Like, this is like playing video games while eating cotton candy. Like, oh my God, hanging out with your best friends. Like, that's like the musical equivalent of that. So live life and like remember that and stay in touch with that. So I think there are lessons to be learned. I think there are stories to be told. I think it's really important, to tell the stories about those musicians and play their music, say their names, for what it's worth. Those things help me to kind of keep going and to share, to share the things they would have wanted you to share,
Yeah. It's all beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course, man.
Yeah. If before we're done, if there's anything you're putting out that you want people to be aware of, places online, services you offer, you can put it out there and send them to the right places.
Yeah, definitely. My current, educational like passion project is Office Hours with Kris Johnson. On social media, I imagine, some of you guys are pretty aware of what's going on, but it's just Office Hours with Kris spelled Kris. And it's just a bunch of free educational tools, advice, theory, practice, improvisation, all that sort of stuff. And if you feel so compelled and you feel inspired and you want to take it to the next level and you like the way that I teach stuff, we also have a couple of paid courses as well. There's a music theory starter kit. I did a masterclass on looping, as well as progressions you should know, which just breaks down like a bunch of different chord progressions that you should know, and just kind of details them out, writes them out in all 12 keys, as well as like a video lesson, kind of like what I was talking about earlier. And then also virtual band production, which especially right now is like, it's like a course for $199, and it teaches you how I put together my multi-frame big band videos. But again, don't get too worried about that as much as go check out the free resources and DM me, ask me questions, check in, listen to some music if you find it healing. I got a couple of videos that just never got released for whatever reason that I actually did with Courtney. There was a live performance I did in Lehigh, Utah at the Adobe headquarters, and Matt Lima filmed it. And it was my cousin Lauren Johnson playing drums, myself on trumpet, and Courtney playing keyboard / bass in his left hand. It's ridiculous. But I'm gonna release some of those so we can just kind of remember Courtney and keep that going, and everybody just check him out and just remember, like, man, this man loved music, so let's just love music in a similar way and just, respect his legacy.
That does it for this episode of the Happy Musicians podcast. The feature track is entitled It's Your Turn. It's a completely improvised piece of music from Kris Johnson on trumpet, his cousin Lauren Johnson on drums, and Courtney Isaiah Smith on keys. You can find links to this and everything else we talk about on this episode at thehappymusicians.com. Also on Kris's post, I have a curated list of my favorite of his digital offerings. He has a visual audio album entitled Safe that I think is especially fantastic. And I'm really proud of the website. I hope you'll spend some time there. I've gone out of my way to make it a safe and supportive place for your happy musician's journey. There's a blog with targeted essays where I break down some of the issues we face. There is a free weekly music recommendation service called Fresh Picks. And there's a merch. We got an online store. There are hoodies and t-shirts and practice field mugs and positivity posters. And not only do you get a high quality product in your life to remind you that you're trying to be a happier musician, you also support the podcast. And if you don't have the funds for that, I totally understand. There are plenty of free and easy ways to support the podcast as well. You can follow me on social media at The Happy Musicians. You can text it to a friend, let them know about it. Share it with your friends and your family and the other musicians in your life. And you can leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, which is the most effective way to help me fight this algorithm battle we're all in. And that's all I got. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you'll be with me again next week. And until then, stay happy, y'all.